My name is Margaret, and I'm 74 years old. And if you had told me even a year ago that I'd be standing on the deck of a ferry headed toward a tiny coastal town in Maine, heart pounding like I was 20 again, I would have laughed right in your face. You see, for most of my life, I've been what people politely call steady. I married young, raised 2 children, kept the same house in upstate New York for over 40 years, and volunteered at the same Methodist church every Sunday. I didn't chase adventures. I kept my feet firmly planted. After my husband Walter passed away 6 years ago, I told myself that was it. I was done with surprises. I filled my days with small, predictable routines. Doctor visits, gardening, organizing old photo albums. I still baked apple pies the way my mother taught me back in 1959, using too much cinnamon and never measuring the sugar. But no matter how much I tried to keep busy, the loneliness had a way of seeping in. The nights were the hardest. I'd sit by the window with a cup of chamomile tea, listening to old Frank Sinatra records, staring at the framed photos of my kids when they were small. The neighborhood had changed too. Young families moved in, new cars replaced the old Buicks and Chevrolets, and no one stopped to chat on the sidewalk anymore. One rainy afternoon, while cleaning out the attic, I stumbled upon an old shoebox filled with letters Walter and I exchanged when he was serving overseas. I hadn't opened that box in years. The paper smelled faintly of tobacco and time. Reading his words again made me realize how small my world had become since he was gone. There was one line that stuck with me. "Promise me, Maggie, that you'll never stop living." That night, I sat up in bed, heart aching but strangely restless. I hadn't been anywhere in years. Not since Walter and I took a road trip through Vermont to see the fall colors. And that's when it hit me. What was I waiting for? I still had good legs, a driver's license, and a car that hadn't yet given up on me. So I made a decision that surprised even me. I was going to travel, alone. It started small, a weekend trip to Portland, Maine. I booked a room at a quaint inn near the harbor, a place called the Sea Glass Inn that looked like something out of a postcard. I packed my suitcase, threw in my blood pressure pills, a stack of crossword puzzles, and my favorite scarf. My daughter nearly dropped the phone when I told her, "Mom, are you serious? At your age?" And I said, "Sweetheart, my age is exactly why I'm doing it." When I arrived, the air smelled of salt and pine. The innkeeper, a kind woman named Ruth, greeted me with warm blueberry muffins and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The place felt alive, sailboats drifting across the bay, seagulls calling overhead, the hum of laughter from a small cafe down the street. For the first time in years, I felt awake. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the water, I walked along the pier. A band was playing oldies, the Beach Boys, the Supremes, and I swore I could feel the years melting away with every note. I even caught myself swaying to the rhythm. That's when I met him. His name was Jack, 71 years old, tall with silver hair and a twinkle in his eye that reminded me of a man who'd lived 1,000 lives. He was standing by the railing, sketching the harbor in a weathered notebook. He looked over at me and said, "You're not from around here, are you?" We started talking. He told me he used to be a photojournalist, had traveled all over, Vietnam, Alaska, South America. But after losing his wife 3 years ago, he'd moved to Maine for peace and quiet. Something about him felt steady, yet adventurous, like he'd seen the world but still had room for wonder. We ended up talking for hours that night about the music of our youth, how health checkups seemed to take up more time than we like, and how we both missed handwritten letters and the way neighbors used to drop by unannounced. There was an ease between us that felt both new and familiar. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. It was from Jack. "If you're up for a little adventure, meet me by the dock at 10. I almost didn't go. My practical side told me I was being ridiculous, 74 years old and going off on an adventure with a man I just met. But curiosity and something deeper won out. When I reached the dock, Jack was there with a smile and 2 life jackets. "I've got an old fishing boat," he said, "but she still runs. Thought you might like to see the islands up close." The morning was clear, the sea calm. We set off slowly, the boat chugging along, and I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. The wind whipped through my hair, the sun warmed my face, and I felt more alive than I had in years. As we cruised past rocky shores and lighthouses, we talked about everything under the sun. He told me about photographing storms in Alaska, about losing friends and finding purpose again. I told him about Walter, about the kids, about how I sometimes felt invisible now that I was older. Jack looked at me for a long moment and said, "You're far from invisible, Margaret. You're shining." We stopped at a small island where time seemed to stand still. Wildflowers grew between the rocks, and the air smelled of sea salt and lilac. We spread out sandwiches Ruth had packed from the inn and sat side by side on an old wooden bench. It felt peaceful. But the most interesting thing happened a few days later. Jack invited me on another outing, this time by car. He said he wanted to show me something special. We drove inland through winding forest roads until we reached an old abandoned lighthouse. It had been decommissioned years ago, he told me, but the view from the top was unforgettable. The stairs creaked beneath our feet as we climbed, laughing like kids sneaking where they shouldn't be. When we reached the top, the entire coastline stretched out below us, waves crashing against the rocks, gulls diving through the spray, sunlight glinting off the water. I caught my breath. Standing there, I realized something. I wasn't done living. My story wasn't over. The adventure didn't have to end at 74. It could just be beginning. That night, back at the inn, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Walter's words in that old letter. "Promise me you'll never stop living." For the first time, I felt like I was finally keeping that promise. Jack and I spent the next week exploring Maine's coast. Antique shops, small diners with clam chowder that could heal any soul, even a local fair where we danced, awkward but joyful, to a live jazz band. People stared, of course, but we didn't care. When it was time for me to go home, Jack handed me a small envelope. Inside was a Polaroid he had taken of me standing by the lighthouse, hair tousled by the wind, laughing. On the back he had written, "For the woman who remembered how to live." Now, months later, that photograph sits on my nightstand beside Walter's picture. I like to think both men, one from my past, one from my present, helped me rediscover the woman I thought I'd lost. Love, I've learned, isn't confined to age. It's not something that fades with wrinkles or gray hair. Sometimes it just takes a spark, a moment of courage, a ferry ride, or a stranger with a kind smile to remind you that your heart still knows how to feel. And as I look out the window tonight, the world seems wide open again. The adventure isn't over, not by a long shot.